Good afternoon, everybody. We're joined by Larry Schnurmacher of Phyto. And Phyto is a venture capital fund that offers an opportunity to invest in the cannabis industry through a professionally managed vehicle. Phyto is capitalizing on an emerging market and a new asset class. It's great to have Larry joining us on a very hot topic, the cannabis industry. Thanks for joining us, Larry.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
How's,
Appreciate it.
how's it going today?
It's going really good.
That's good.
Excited to
So,
tell everybody about this new industry.
yeah, definitely. So tell me about your background and how you got involved in the industry.
So I was a regular way wealth manager with Morgan Stanley, amongst other Wall Street brokerage firms for about 25 years. About 4 years ago, 5 years ago at this point, I started to get interested in what was going on in the marijuana industry. I live in Florida, and Florida was about to change the laws, have a vote on it at least. And I saw a huge opportunity to get involved in what I saw as a new industry, an emerging market, a new asset class. I started to look at the industry. I tried to make an investment in a privately held company that was involved in the cannabis industry, and Morgan Stanley would not approve that outside investment. And then I decided to leave Morgan Stanley and start a venture capital fund so that I could invest in these companies.
Interesting. So tell me about Phyto.
Started Phyto in the middle of 2015 with family, friends, and my own capital. And the purpose was to find businesses that we thought were going to benefit from the massive growth of the cannabis industry. We started to source small companies that were providing business critical services to the licensed operators. So the licensed growers that are cultivating marijuana and the licensed sellers, the dispensaries, retailers. They require all sorts of business services, some very similar to any other industry. Some very different and very specific and critical to actually running a business legally in the marijuana industry. And we sought out those types of companies and started to invest in them.
Well, on that, so you started in 2015. Here we are in 2018. How has the regulatory landscape changed versus, when you got started, it was early goings, and, how has it changed even just in the past few years?
So it's interesting. The regulatory situation really hasn't changed much, other than that more states have legalized either medical or recreational adult use of marijuana. The federal government has continued to basically ignore information, scientific data, and just what everybody knows is that marijuana should not be classified as a Schedule I drug that has no medical benefit, is highly addictive and prone to abuse, in the same category as heroin. And that remains the case today, even with 38 states having medical or adult use of marijuana. It's like over 70% of the country. And yet the federal government continues to classify it as a felony if you possess it, grow it, sell it, transport it. The DEA can still close your business down if you're a legally licensed operator. They're not doing that. And in fact, recently the FDA, another agency of the federal government of the United States, approved a cannabis-derived medication to treat childhood epilepsy. GW Pharmaceuticals, it's a drug called Epidiolex. It's used for, like I said, childhood epilepsy, and the FDA approved it. That was less than 90 days ago. I believe the DEA has 90 days now to change the scheduling, because how can you continue to schedule a drug as having no medical benefit when it does?
Right.
So we're going to find out in the next little bit.
So what about from the side of just investing in companies? In 2015, the way you could invest in companies versus now on the regulatory side, because I know that there's still strict laws about investing in those sort of businesses.
Um, it's hard to answer. I mean, individually you can do whatever you want, and face the consequences, sort of with bank accounts being closed because they find out that you're involved or invested in a marijuana business, and since they're a federally what is it, not registered, but banks are federally chartered, they need to comply with federal law rather than state law, or that's how they operate. We don't have any problems investing. It's not the investing part of that's complicated. Some states have you have to be a resident. Like Colorado, for a while you couldn't invest in the industry or own a license if you didn't live in the state, have residency. We're not investing in licensed operators. We're not trying to get licenses in any states. The businesses we've focused on and invested in are businesses that can operate in all 50 states. They're not licensed. They're providing an advertising service, a customer relationship management service, grow technology, a B2B e-commerce platform, business intelligence, a safety packaging, those types of services to the growers and the sellers. So none of the companies I'm investing in are subject, for example, to being rated by the DEA. The DEA would never go into, for example, FlowHub, which is a point of sale, seed to sale tracking compliance technology that reports to the government, retailers, dispensaries sales, or cultivators production. And the DEA, what would they go into to stop them from providing a tech service to the grower or the dispensaries? It's almost silly. They're providing the service that the government requires, so that this marijuana can be regulated and controlled and monitored and taxed.
Right.
So that's just an example. We're invested in a testing lab that provides quality assurance, safety testing, protocols, etc.
Well, on that, if you could kind of continue, like what sort of companies, cannabis businesses, are you investing in and why at the moment?
So we love technology companies, and we love companies that have a data component. Technology, the obvious answer, it's scalable, normally low capex. Once you get a customer, there's SaaS revenue and that kind of thing. Easy to scale. We can work in any state, any country. And again, you become business critical. The businesses can't function without you. Obviously, there's not only one of those businesses that service the industry, but the ones that have the most market share, the biggest footprint, are going to succeed. And there are also companies that easily could be sold or bought by bigger, either publicly traded or privately held companies that want to get involved in the cannabis industry at some point. So a company like Baker that does CRM, that's not unique what they do. They do customer relationship management for dispensaries, but the majors that do that didn't want to service the cannabis space. So they have now 1,400 dispensaries. They have one of the biggest footprints in the industry. They're seeing hundreds of thousands of patient data and information daily. That we're looking for companies that are actually mining all the data that's going to be needed by the pharmaceutical companies, the brand companies, the new product companies, in order to launch new products, to make new drugs, because the information about the usage of marijuana, cannabis in people's lives has not been recorded. There's been no data. The data is being created like as we speak with a new market. And that data is going to be hugely valuable. So almost probably 75% of the investments we've made have that data component that I believe will be extremely valuable. I don't know how to put a number on it, but we invested in a company that does patient management for cannabis doctor offices. So medical cannabis physicians need a software to manage their patients, just like a dentist or a skin doctor or any other doctor, and cannabis is specific. This company already has 90,000 patients on board, 100 sites, and they are collecting data that will be able to be used as clinical data for studies without having to do a clinical study. When Pfizer wants to make an appetite drug for out of cannabis. So yeah, we look for technology, data, and again, companies or businesses that help the operators with costs, with their customers, with their internal operations, anything that will help the licensed guys do business better and succeed in this fast changing, highly regulated industry.
Well, on that point, can you discuss the issues with licensed operators, growers, dispensers versus the ancillary businesses that service?
Other than the fact that the DEA could walk in, if, for example, recently in Colorado, there's a chain of dispensaries and a grower and a processor named Sweetleaf, one of the industry incumbents in Colorado. Anybody there knows Sweetleaf. And it seems that their bud tenders were overselling. You're only allowed to sell like an ounce at a time to a customer, etc. And the police decided that they would try to buy more than the daily amount, and they were successful. The bud tenders continued to sell them marijuana, and the DEA ended up going in and shutting down 13 retail locations, a processing facility, and a large grow, and recently, I think, revoked all their licenses, and that's the end of Sweetleaf. So other than that happening, licensed operators have unfair tax treatment. There is something called 280E. It's a tax code that was put in place for organized crime and I guess drug sellers or people running illegal operations who wanted to file tax returns, even though they were committing a crime. But if they were willing to submit tax returns on their criminal activities, 280E says that you are not allowed to deduct normal business expenses the way other, I guess, legal businesses are. So operators and dispensaries are subject to this unfair tax law, 280E, which makes your taxable income much, much higher, 50, 60% higher than it might be normally. So you're subject to that, having to deal with it. Licensed operators can only operate in one jurisdiction because you can't transport cannabis over state lines or out of the country. So a grower or a dispensary can only sell within its bounds. No matter how much that grower grows, he's got to sell it all there.
I was just going to say, right now in the industry, do you think that there's still good value out there, or is there people? It seems like the premium and the it's such a hot sector that the valuations are pretty high at the moment. Are you seeing that, or are there still good value plays out there?
So the public market, I would say, is it doesn't really make sense on a valuation standpoint for most of the publicly traded companies. And lots of the publicly traded companies, the so-called, let's say, the pot stocks, that some of them don't really have businesses really. Legitimate ones, let's call it, I don't know, Canopy Growth, for example, which just went public, or just started to trade on the New York Stock Exchange, got a big investment from Constellation Brands. They're going to do less than 100 million in revenue, and their valuation, and they're not going to be profitable on that, and their valuation's around 10 billion according to this recent investment from Constellation Brands. And that, in most metrics is overvalued. In the private market where I'm looking, I'm finding or trying to find regular businesses. They're not hyped up. They're not pumped up. They're not, they went public and it's a pot, it's going to be, like a MedMen, which is, a high profile dispensary IPO. These are real businesses that are developing, huge revenue streams, and benefiting from all the capital that's being raised by these publicly traded companies, because ultimately they're going to invest that into the industry and hopefully into some of the companies that we invest in, whether it be for safety packaging or for advertising, or to develop bigger and better grow operations, to connect with their vendors, their retailers. The list goes on of all the services that these companies need, consumer packaged goods and all the product development having to do with that. They're like industries within industries.
Yeah. Well, you kind of answered this question that somebody just asked, but I'll follow up with it. Are pot stocks the next bubble?
I don't think it's getting, if you added them all up, the valuations in total is still, probably microscopic compared to the next, industry, that would be considered a bubble, not just any industry. So the kind of the gross number is still probably really small and has a lot of room. When people want to invest in the industry, they're not going to go try to find a small technology company that's privately held, because that's not how people can do it. So where do they go? They go to the public, they go to TD Ameritrade and they search marijuana stocks or whatever, and then they get a handful of companies and they can sort through it. Most of those I would not put money in. I don't think that's where the value is. I think there will be there's a big gap between private and public valuations, and that will close over time. Public will come down, private will go up. At least that's how I see it happening.
Sure. Now, what about what's the future of this industry? Let's look at 5 years from now.
Wow. If you look at the growth over the last 5 years, it's not even the growth, the change, but the growth as well, whether it be dollar amounts or patient count throughout the country, I think that marijuana or the cannabis industry is going to affect so many other industries and so many parts of society. So everybody kind of, the medical marijuana part is obvious, and let's call it the adult use part of it is obvious. But there is so much in between, from alcohol to sports, resorts to restaurants, fitness, health and wellness, juice bars, lounges, clinics that will only do medical marijuana recommendations and prescriptions, but not just a recommendation. People can use marijuana for pain, stress, anxiety, MS, ALS, Alzheimer's. There's a huge list of indications that cannabis-derived medications can be used for. So there's going to need to be specialties within medicine just to help people navigate marijuana, cannabis as a medicine. It's a term I've now started to use, like SaaS, software as a service. Well, cannabis as a medicine. Marijuana does not equal getting high. That is what everybody believes it is. Everybody believes marijuana gets you high. It's a gateway drug. I'm going to go to heroin. It's going to ruin my life. It's not going to. All these negative, the propaganda that's been going on for 100 years about this, what truly is a magic plant. If we found this today, it would be very different. Um, this industry is going to look very different. It's going to be multiple industries, serious disruption on many industries. If you look just at alcohol, the wine industry should be taking a huge, huge look at what's going to happen to their female consumer that discovers that they can either take a gummy bear that has next to no calories, does not cause a hangover, makes them feel exactly the same, if not better, than any wine that they drink. Again, no calories, and I'll say again, no calories, no hangover. The wine industry should be petrified. Vape pens, these easy to use, convenient smoke. They're smoking, but it's not smoking. It doesn't smell. There's no ash. You don't need a lighter. You don't need a cigarette. Nothing. You don't roll it. It's really convenient. You take like 3 little puffs and you feel amazing.
Yeah.
The women love it. Fits in your pocketbook. It's super duper. I think that the wine industry could see a 25 to 50% hit from cannabis derived stuff that's going to eat their life. Women don't want calories. They don't want to be hungover. They don't want the sugar that makes them have a headache or whatever, the nitrates in wine.
So are there any companies, now I also want to make it clear, we're not investment advisors, we're not giving investment advice, but are there any public companies that are in that kind of arena that look attractive?
I mean, look, Constellation Brands seems to think that, or is at least making a $4.5 billion bet that they're going to be able to create cannabis-derived elixirs that will either add to sales or prevent them from losing, being cannibalized, so to speak, by something else that women or even men, but I'm going to go with mostly women, will gravitate towards something like this. So no, I don't really look at the publicly traded stocks from an investment standpoint. I'm thrilled that they trade and that they're able to raise capital and that they're building the industry. But I don't recommend them or not. I don't really look at them. I only for informational purposes. It's not for trying to find a value or an investment.
Okay, and what about on the private side? Any new areas that you think are?
Yeah. So recently, in the last 6 months, our sourcing and work has brought us very much closer to the demand side of the continuum of where to invest. So, if it's grower to retailer, and then there's process, everybody's in between. So our first investment 3.5 years ago, was in a testing lab because I felt that everything had to be tested, quality control, consistency, assurance, potency, etc. Nothing can be put on the market without first going through this toll booth of testing. So, and we focused on grow technologies, things that can help the growers lower their costs, because I have a thesis that the price of cannabis will decline much, much, much more than people want to believe as this industry and time goes on. Recently, though, we have come to see that there's a lot of opportunity on the doctor-patient, and I'm going to call it the demand side. So until doctors are on board, acknowledging that cannabis should be part of protocol and treatment programs, and it should be an alternative, not just like, oh, you're dying and this is our last resort, but maybe this could be the first resort or the second for people. So as doctors, as more patients or people learn about medical marijuana, and that you don't get high, and that it doesn't, all the fictitious stuff about it, and they hear from their friend or a relative that this is something they should look at for some ailment. So we've started to focus on how do you get more doctors, more patients, this demand? How do you create the demand for all this stuff that's going to be made? And that's brought us to, like I was explaining before, this sale, this patient management platform. We're looking at a diagnostic test that tells people, helps patients and doctors figure out how their body's going to react to cannabis, CBD and THC, to using medical marijuana. So for the most part now, when a patient goes into a doctor's office, they're going for a wink, wink. I need a medical marijuana recommendation. I have, chronic pain. I have, whatever the indication is that they tell them. And the doctor then can qualify them, but it's not necessarily a diagnosis, and it's not a prescription that they get. The doctor qualifies them as having, and this is in almost every medical state, that this is kind of the procedure. The doctor qualifies you, that says you have stress because you told them you have stress. You told them you had a car accident. Every time you get in the car, you freak out, panic attacks, or whatever it is that your stress is. There's no diagnosis for that or way for him to evaluate that. But there is a way for him to give you a test that could say what he should prescribe to you, what you should or shouldn't take, how much you should or shouldn't take. If you're susceptible to paranoia, you don't want to take THC or a lot of it, because those are the people who get freaked out. If other things that a test would provide a doctor and a patient with, so information of how to use this medicine.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
And again, both of those have data components that become extremely valuable. In fact, this one company we're looking at is actually could be compared to like a 23andMe. And GlaxoSmithKline, I believe last week, invested $300 million into 23andMe for some percentage of the company in order to get access to 4 million people's DNA tests so that they can, I guess, develop drugs or figure out, something. This investment that we're looking at now is very similar to that kind of data.
Interesting. A lot of great information. Definitely keep us up to date. Hopefully come back and give us some updates on the industry as you see some new opportunities pop up. But very informative. Really appreciate it. So this is Larry Schnurmacher with Phyto, and so they're doing a lot of interesting things in the cannabis industry. Thanks for joining us, Larry.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it.